Unemployment has risen in Canada to 6.4%, but it's 13.5% for young people, making life even less affordable for a group that is already facing some headwinds. Brendon Bernard is senior economist at Indeed Hiring Lab. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So youth unemployment is always higher than the broader number, maybe for obvious reasons. Not all young people are working and they may have different needs. But this is a 10-year high, not including the pandemic. What do you think is going on here?
Well, there are a few trends going on at the same time. You mentioned that youth always have higher unemployment rates than the national average, and that's true. But I think the gap is widening a little bit more recently, and that's partially just a reflection of kind of the divided nature of trends in the job market these days. So on the positive side, while the Canadian job market has weakened over the past year or two, it's not really been driven by rising layoffs. So job security among people who are stably employed has actually remained pretty strong. Instead, the weakness has mainly come from weak rates of hiring. It's tougher to get new jobs. And so people on the margins of the labor market, like youth who are often in and out of school and in and out of jobs, they're the ones who are most hit by this weak hiring trend. Partially, it's just because there was a ton of hiring coming out of the pandemic that has receded now. We see job postings on Indeed have come back down substantially from their earlier highs. And so youth are one of the groups that's going to be most vulnerable to those shifts in demand and the cyclicality of the economy. And so that's one factor behind their weak employment numbers of late.
And you said a couple of trends. What else is going on out there?
Well, so that's on the demand side. And kind of the demand side is a macroeconomic story. We can talk about interest rates and things like that also at play. But there's another trend on the supply side that also is particularly impacting youth. And that's just the surge in Canadian population. So Canada's population growth has been really rapid of late, driven by newcomers from abroad. And it's actually especially rapid within that 15 to 24-year-old cohort. Mm-hmm. The labor force survey reported that the youth population, 15 to 24-year-olds, had jumped 7% in just the past year in June. So that's a huge jump in the number of job seekers within this cohort at the same time when employer demand is waning. It's not a good combination for youth unemployment.
So I guess one thing that comes to mind, Brendon, is whether this sets young people back permanently. In other words, is there a longer-term consequence to this period being difficult for them?
That really depends on how long this current situation lasts. We saw it during the pandemic, actually, when youth employment was one of the categories that was hardest hit, that when things bounced back quickly, for instance, when things reopened as the pandemic eased, youth employment bounced back quite quickly. So it does show some flexibility within the group that doesn't have to be permanent, but the longer this situation lasts, I think the greater the risks are. And that can kind of happen in a few different ways. But one of them is that if it takes longer for people to land entry level roles, well, the new cohorts of youth are always entering the labor market. So it causes a bit of a traffic jam. And that's something that we see happen in recessions. And so this current situation is a bit unique, partially because of that surging population growth that might actually fall back down if recent federal policy changes start to stem the flow of non-permanent residents. So it's not clear whether this will be sort of like a long, slow-moving cycle like we typically see coming out of recessions. But the longer it lasts, the greater the traffic jam is that will build up for those entry-level roles, and the greater the risks for people's career trajectories. All
right, Brendon, so good to have you. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Brendon Bernard is senior economist at Indeed Hiring Lab. Time for the takeaway and how it isn't easy being green. The federal government's new greenwashing law is getting some pushback from industry, and that raises some interesting questions about how big business is treating the transition from fossil fuels. Bill C-59 was introduced last fall as part of the fall economic statement, and it contained a new law around greenwashing. Those new rules come at the request of Canada's Competition Authority, which had asked for beefed-up tools to protect consumers. The issue: claims made by business about how they're protecting the environment or making sustainable choices, or in fact moving towards a so-called net zero footprint. and the trouble we run into when no one is policing those claims. The idea that businesses shouldn't use false statements that mislead customers is hardly new, but with intense interest in how corporations are responding to the climate emergency, the Competition Bureau saw a need for stronger tools in this particular category. The Bureau is already investigating some complaints on this front, including one against Lululemon, which suggests the apparel maker claimed to be environmentally conscious despite its carbon emissions rising sharply over a 2-year period. Maybe it seems obvious that businesses shouldn't make false claims about, well, anything, but there's plenty of concern about this law being expressed, including that the new law will actually slow down progress towards greener behavior. In the aftermath of its passage, an alliance of oil companies working on green alternatives removed all of its online content. Surely an overreaction if that content was factual. Businesses tend to do things for only 2 reasons: because customers demand it or because law compels it. And if they're taking action, it's generally best if they are transparent about it. My takeaway: Canadian businesses will continue to evolve towards a zero-footprint future, and it's a sign of maturity that they do it in the bright light of day. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.